Picture this. 80,000 people are watching you. Not watching you serve food, not watching you weave, not watching you do any of the things that Roman society has decided women are for. They are watching you fight, with weapons, against another person who is also trying to kill you, and they are screaming your name. This is the Colosseum. This is ancient Rome, and you are something that Roman historians alternately celebrated, condemned, mocked, and found completely impossible to categorize. You are a female gladiator. The Romans called you a gladiatrix, and almost everything you think you know about you is wrong. Let's start with the basic question everyone asks. Did female gladiators actually exist? Or is this one of those things that sounds exciting, but turns out to be a footnote, an exception, a single documented case that gets blown into a trend? The answer is, they existed. They were not common. They were not equal to male gladiators in terms of frequency or status. But they were real. They were documented by multiple independent sources, they performed in the arena, and they were popular enough that the Emperor Domitian specifically staged fights between women and dwarf men as entertainment at his court. Which tells you that female gladiatorial combat was sufficiently established as a concept that the emperor could use it as a reference point for spectacle. Here is what the sources actually say. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing in the 1st century CE, records that in 63 CE, women of equestrian and senatorial rank, meaning elite, upper-class Roman women, not slaves or criminals, descended into the arena and fought as gladiators. Tacitus is clearly appalled. His description drips with contempt. But he is also clearly describing something real that happened in front of witnesses. The satirist Juvenal, writing in the early 2nd century, devotes a significant portion of his 6th satire to mocking women who train as gladiators. He describes them practicing sword strokes, wearing helmets, and doing physical training. Again, his tone is contemptuous. But contempt requires a real target. You do not write elaborate satirical poetry about something that does not exist. The historian Cassius records that Nero staged gladiatorial spectacles in which women participated. He records that Emperor Domitian was particularly fond of staging combats between women. And then there is the physical evidence. In 1996, archaeologists excavating a site in Southwark, South London, which was Roman Londinium, discovered skeletal remains of a woman buried with grave goods that included small oil lamps depicting gladiators, incense burners, and pine cones. The burial was expensive. It was clearly someone of significance. The gladiator imagery in the burial goods has led some archaeologists to argue this was the burial of a female gladiator, or at minimum, someone with a deep connection to gladiatorial culture. And in 2000, the British Museum acquired a small bronze statuette from the late Roman period showing a female figure in a victory pose, her right arm raised, wearing gladiatorial equipment. The statuette is small, but it is specific. The equipment depicted matches the equipment of actual gladiators, not theatrical costumes. So they existed. Now let's talk about who they actually were, because the answer is more complicated than the simple narrative of brave women defying Roman gender norms. The overwhelming majority of gladiators, male and female, were not volunteers choosing a career. They were slaves, prisoners of war, or convicted criminals assigned to the arena by the Roman judicial and slave systems. The gladiatorial schools, the ludi, were facilities owned by businessmen who trained gladiators as investments. A well-trained gladiator was expensive and valuable. You did not waste a valuable investment by getting them killed unnecessarily. This is the fact that changes everything about how we understand gladiatorial combat. The Hollywood version, 2 people entering an arena with 1 leaving, was not the everyday reality of the gladiatorial system. Professional gladiators were trained to put on a good show, to wound and display skill, and ideally to both survive and fight again. A dead gladiator was a financial loss. Female gladiators existed within this same commercial system. They were trained, they were presented, they were a novelty act, something different from the regular program, something that the crowd would pay to see because it subverted their expectations. Here is where it gets complicated in a way that the exciting version of this story leaves out. The Roman audience's enthusiasm for female gladiators was not about respect for female combat ability. It was about the transgressive pleasure of watching women do something women were not supposed to do. The same Roman men who watched women fight in the arena were the same Roman men who expected their wives and daughters to be modest, domestic, and controlled. The arena was a space where normal rules were suspended, where slaves became heroes, where death was entertainment, where women could fight. The suspension of the rule was the point, not the women. Juvenal's contempt makes this clear. He is not angry that women are being allowed to do something great. He is angry that women are degrading themselves by doing something shameful, that they are abandoning their proper role for a spectacle. His contempt is aimed at the women themselves, not at the system that put them there. And yet, the women who chose this path, and some did choose it, particularly freeborn women who contracted voluntarily with gladiatorial schools, made a specific calculation. The arena offered something that almost no other Roman institution offered women: money, recognition, and a form of public identity that was not defined by whose wife or daughter you were. A successful female gladiator had a name the crowd knew. She had income. She had, for the duration of her career, a form of individual existence that Roman social life otherwise made nearly impossible for women. Was this freedom? Not in any clean sense. She was still within a system that was fundamentally about providing entertainment for men. She was still subject to the authority of the lanista, the gladiatorial school owner, who could deploy her however he chose. She still faced the possibility of death or serious injury in every bout. But she was also someone. In a society that worked very hard to make women into the appendages of men, she was a person with a crowd chanting her name. Now let's talk about what happened to the record of her existence. In 200 CE, the Emperor Septimius Severus issued an edict banning women from gladiatorial combat. The edict itself is significant. You do not ban something that does not exist. The ban tells us that female gladiatorial combat was sufficiently common and visible by 200 CE that an emperor felt the need to officially prohibit it. After the ban, the documentary record thins considerably. Female gladiators disappear from the historical sources, not because historians stopped writing about interesting things, but because the activity had been officially prohibited and the institutional structure that had supported it, the gladiatorial schools, the official programs, the arena bookings, no longer included them. The physical evidence survives. The statuette is in the British Museum. The Southwark burial remains in the Museum of London. The literary references in Tacitus, Juvenal, and Cassius Dio are still readable. But the women themselves have been written out of the popular understanding of Roman history in a way that the male gladiators have not. When we say gladiator, we picture a man. The image is so thoroughly masculine that the existence of women who did the same thing, trained in the same schools, fought in the same arenas, died in the same sand, requires deliberate excavation to recover. That excavation is the work, not of imagination, of reading what was already there. They were there. Screaming crowds knew their names. Emperors staged their fights as special entertainment. An emperor felt the need to ban them specifically, which means they were present enough to ban. And then someone decided the story of Roman gladiators was a story about men. It was not only that, it never was.